He returns, exhausted, composed, right on time, as always. Home awaits, along with Saturday morning with his son. But something feels wrong on the quiet street. Flashing sirens, neighbors clustered in uneasy groups, the yard sealed off with police tape. One step forward, and everything collapses. Protocols, procedures, hands behind his back. His wife's eyes are full of tears, but there's more fear in them than sorrow. Her voice, when she speaks to the public, sounds rehearsed, like she's reading from a script. The evidence is too precise, too convenient. It's as if someone had staged the entire performance in advance. He breaks it all down, searching for inconsistencies, just as he's done in business, and finds them. And the deeper he digs, the clearer it becomes. None of this is random. Someone planned it all, down to the smallest detail, but he's going to find out who. And he's going to make every one of them pay for thinking they could break him. Welcome, dear viewer. Before we get into the video, I ask you, please open the description and subscribe to my friend's channel. It means a lot. Now let's begin. Brandon Mercer watched the rain slice across the Seattle skyline, the lights of the city warping behind the water-streaked windows of the cab as it rolled through familiar territory. Though he'd only been away for just under 2 weeks, the streets of his neighborhood felt stripped of warmth. A chill, instinctive unease crept into his spine. Just there, on the right, he instructed the driver, glancing at the time. 9:40 p.m. Sharp. That mattered to him. It always had. The trip had been grueling. 5 states, visits to 3 manufacturing plants, each one drowning in logistical disasters. Systems to assess, workflows to diagnose, metrics to untangle. This was Brandon's natural element. He'd handled every challenge with the detached efficiency that had defined his career for 15 years. As the taxi came to a gentle stop, a heavy weariness pressed against the edges of his mind. But fatigue was a luxury he didn't afford himself. He would allow 6 hours of sleep before dedicating Saturday morning to Wesley. Thinking of his son, the one unguarded joy in his structured world, his posture straightened instinctively. Rain drummed softly on the roof as the car idled. He paid the exact fare, added a calculated tip, retrieved his small bag, and stepped into the damp night air. That's when he noticed the first sign, the strobe of emergency lights. Far too many. Red and blue washed across the wet asphalt of the normally quiet street. The second, clusters of neighbors huddled under umbrellas and raincoats, murmuring in low voices as he approached. Brandon didn't slow. He never did, even when events slipped beyond his control. 3 patrol cars sat at the curb in front of his house. Police officers moved briskly beneath a line of yellow tape that dissected his pristine front yard. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay behind the tape," a young officer said, stepping forward with his palm raised. "That's my residence," Brandon replied, voice steady and restrained. "What's happening?" The officer hesitated, his expression shifting as recognition dawned. He keyed his radio. "Detective, looks like Mr. Mercer just arrived." A man emerged from the house, a seasoned figure with gray at his temples, tired eyes, and a wrinkled suit that still held an air of command. He assessed Brandon with a firm, unreadable stare before signaling to 2 officers nearby. Brandon didn't resist their approach. He asked only one thing. "Where are my wife and my son?" The detective stepped in, his badge catching a glint from the nearby cruiser. "You're Brandon Mercer?" "I am. Where are they?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he gave a subtle nod, and one of the officers moved behind Brandon. "Sir, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." "What's this about?" Brandon asked, still composed, though his mind had already leapt into overdrive, scanning for explanations. Was this about financial irregularities? A corporate rival planting evidence? Some form of industrial espionage? "Brandon Mercer, you are being placed under arrest for the murder of Wesley Mercer." The words landed like static, garbled, senseless, as if spoken in a language he didn't know. My son? No, that's not right. The metal cuffs snapped into place, cold against his skin. His vision constricted, everything funneling into a blur. Wesley, his son, his reason for all of it, dead? And by his own hand? Impossible. The detective began reading him his rights, but the words barely registered. Then, through the open front door, Brandon caught a glimpse inside the house. Morgan stood in the foyer, tears running down her cheeks. She clung to an officer's arm. Their eyes met. Hers were red, hollow, but something in her expression didn't match the grief. 12 years of marriage had taught Brandon to read her pauses, her facades. This was off. But before he could piece the feeling together, he was already being led toward a squad car. I need to see my son, Brandon said, his voice clipped, urgent. There's been a mistake. You'll get answers downtown, the detective replied, his grip firm as Brandon was guided into the vehicle. The door shut with a solid thud. Through the rain-speckled glass, he saw the faces of neighbors, shocked, repulsed, quietly condemning. He forced his breathing to slow. He needed clarity. Wesley couldn't be gone. And if he was, Brandon hadn't done it. That left only one possibility. This had been engineered. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, the disbelief began to harden into something cold and focused. A steady, sharpened resolve. He would uncover what truly happened to his son and make sure the one behind it faced the consequences. The interrogation room at the Seattle Police Department was exactly what he had anticipated. Bare walls, a harsh overhead bulb, and a mirror that almost certainly concealed observers. He had been sitting still for an hour, sorting through probabilities and scenarios like data sets in his mind. At last, the door opened. A woman entered, late 40s, crisp gray suit, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense style. She carried a thick file and a cup of coffee she didn't offer to share. Mr. Mercer, she said coolly. Detective Kara Moreau. She dropped the folder onto the table and took a seat across from him. Would you like to explain what happened? I want to know one thing, Brandon said, voice steady. Is my son dead? Brandon kept his voice composed, steady. Across the table, Detective Moreau scrutinized him, reading every flicker of emotion. The body found in your garage, she said, has been tentatively identified. It appears to be your son. The words struck Brandon like a physical hit, but he didn't flinch. He refused to let emotion breach the surface. Then I need to see him, he said evenly. That's not an option right now. Moreau opened a file folder with a practiced motion. You haven't asked for an attorney, she noted. I don't need one, Brandon replied. I didn't kill my son. Then help me make sense of the story your wife gave us. She says you came home earlier than scheduled. We found clothing with blood on it in your size in your workshop. Neighbors reported a loud altercation 2 nights ago, and your phone was used to send threatening messages to the victim. Her stare didn't waver. Brandon ran through the accusations one by one in his head, dissecting them. Calmly, he answered, I never returned early. I was in Detroit up until this morning. Then I flew out of Chicago about 3 hours ago. The airline can confirm it. I've been away for nearly 2 weeks. He leaned in slightly, emphasizing his point. And I would never threaten Wesley, not once. Your wife tells a different story, Moreau said. She described you arriving yesterday, getting into a heated exchange with Wesley, then sending her to get groceries. When she got back, you were cleaning the garage, and Wesley had vanished. Brandon's jaw clenched tight. She's not telling the truth. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Mercer. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Pull the flight manifests. Call the hotel. Check the surveillance cameras at the logistics center in Chicago. I spent the whole day there. I never stepped foot outside Illinois. Though his tone remained composed, there was anger simmering just beneath it, not aimed at Moreau, who was doing her job, but at the situation. at whoever had taken his son. "We're checking your alibi now," Moreau said. "But the case against you is significant. Those texts were sent from your number." "Then someone spoofed it," Brandon said. "That kind of thing isn't hard to pull off." She gave a slight nod, acknowledging the possibility. "Are you and your wife having problems?" It was a careful question. Brandon took a moment before responding. "Nothing beyond what most couples go through." "Your neighbors suggest otherwise. They've reported frequent arguments, shouting, tension." "Between Morgan and me, maybe," Brandon allowed. "But not with Wesley. Never with my son." He met her eyes squarely. "Wesley and I didn't fight. Not once." Moreau scribbled something in her notebook. "When was the last time you spoke with him?" 4 days ago. We did a video call." The memory cut deep. Wesley had been buzzing with excitement over a school science project, proudly showing off the model he'd built. The thought that it might have been their last conversation was unbearable. Brandon forced it down. "We talked about regular things, school, his project." He paused, then said, "Detective, I want to see the texts you mentioned." Moreau hesitated a second before sliding her phone across the table. The screen displayed a chat history, allegedly between Brandon and Wesley. "I know what you did. We'll deal with it when I'm back." "Dad, please. It wasn't my fault. I'm done with excuses. You've let me down one too many times." "I'm sorry. I'll fix it." "Too late. I'll handle it when I get home." A cold weight settled in Brandon's chest. "I didn't send these," he said. "This isn't how I talk to my son." "Your wife confirmed the messages," Moreau replied, retrieving her phone. "She told us Wesley was terrified of your return. Then she's involved, or at least she knows more than she's saying." The words escaped before Brandon could stop them. Moreau raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong accusation." "It's the only one that makes sense. I didn't come home early. I didn't send those texts. And I didn't harm my son." His voice was level, but the tension underneath had grown sharp. "Someone is trying to frame me, and Morgan is either part of it, or someone's using her to pull it off." "Is there anyone you suspect would want to implicate you in a murder?" she asked. Brandon thought for a long moment. "Maybe a competitor. I've got rivals in business. But this is personal. This isn't about money. It's about causing pain." "Do you have any specific names?" "Not yet," Brandon said quietly. "But I will." "Mr. Mercer, you realize you're the primary suspect in a homicide investigation," Moreau said. "You're in no position to conduct your own inquiry." "I know exactly where I stand," Brandon said, locking eyes with her. "And I also know that while you're focused on me, whoever really did this, if my son is truly gone, is walking free." Something shifted in Moreau's expression. Doubt, perhaps. She began gathering her notes. "We'll be holding you overnight while we verify your claims," she said. "My advice, get a lawyer. You should focus on finding whoever really killed my son." Brandon's voice was ice cold. Detective Moreau stood up slowly. "Just one more thing, Mr. Mercer," she said. "The blood we discovered on the clothes stored in your garage, preliminary tests show it's the same type as your son's." She left on that note, shutting the door softly behind her. Brandon didn't move. His mind, always sharp, always orderly, began spinning with precise mechanical clarity. This had been orchestrated. Someone had either murdered Wesley or made it appear that way, then arranged the evidence to implicate him, and turned Morgan against him in the process. The motive wasn't important yet. What mattered was uncovering the facts. What mattered more was holding the guilty accountable. The cell was sparse and cold, but Brandon barely registered the discomfort. He sat straight-backed on the thin mattress, his gaze fixed on the gray cement wall ahead. To the guard watching through the narrow glass, Brandon might have seemed eerily calm. But behind that stillness, his thoughts were relentless. He began replaying the past few months, analyzing them with ruthless precision, searching for the missed clues. Morgan had begun pulling away. At the time, he'd blamed his constant travel. Major deals had kept him flying nearly non-stop the past quarter. But with hindsight, the picture shifted. Her sudden dedication to yoga classes 3 nights a week, the way she'd quickly swipe her phone screen out of view when he walked into the room, the small, seemingly innocent lies about where she'd been or who she'd seen. And then, the life insurance policies. Those stood out now, starkly. Around 2 months ago, she'd suggested increasing their coverage. For security, she'd told him. Brandon, always thinking in terms of risk management, had agreed without question. He'd signed the forms while multitasking, barely reading them. Now he remembered. She'd added a substantial rider for Wesley. Everything fell into place with chilling precision. Morgan was seeing someone else, and that affair, whether it had spiraled into tragedy or was part of a calculated plan, had resulted in Wesley's death, or at least in a believable facsimile. Now Brandon was being framed. The clang of the cell door jolted him out of his thoughts. "You're lucky, Mercer," the officer said. "Looks like your alibi holds. For now. We've got security footage from the Chicago hotel. Proves you checked in just like your wife said you didn't. She wants to speak to you again." Brandon rose in silence, his thoughts still turning over every possibility. Detective Moreau waited for him in the same plain interrogation room. Her expression was more guarded now. "Please sit, Mr. Mercer." He did, wordlessly. "Your hotel records seem to back your story," she acknowledged. "But we still have inconsistencies." She leaned in. "Your wife claims you were home. She described what you were wearing, how you sounded. She even quoted part of your conversation." "My wife is lying," Brandon said, voice steady. "It wasn't a theory, it was a fact. And why would she lie about that?" "I have some theories." Brandon leaned forward. "Detective, I'd like to review the footage from our home security system. We had cameras installed last year." Moreau's face tightened. The system was offline. "Your wife told us you typically turn it off, for privacy reasons." "That's not true," Brandon said. "The system stays on at all times." Another confirmation. She scribbled a note in her pad. "We did check your neighbor's camera. It captures part of your driveway." She hesitated. "It shows someone entering your garage during the time your wife said you returned home, but the figure doesn't match your appearance." A grim flicker of satisfaction passed through Brandon, a crack in their version of events. "In what way is the figure different?" he asked. "Heavier. The posture's wrong. The gait doesn't resemble yours." Moreau studied him closely. "Mr. Mercer, is there anyone who might have had access to your property? Someone with a reason to hurt your son?" "I'm beginning to form a theory," Brandon said cautiously. "But I need to make a phone call. To your lawyer, I assume?" "Yes." 20 minutes later, Brandon sat in a quiet corner, holding the receiver tightly, voice low and precise. "Graham, I need your help. Not as a friend, as my attorney." Graham Everett sounded alert despite the hour. "What's happening?" "I've been arrested. They're accusing me of killing Wesley." A long silence. "Tell me that's some kind of sick joke. You think I'd joke about my son?" "Jesus." Graham's voice dropped. "Is he really gone?" "They say he is," Brandon replied evenly. "I haven't seen the body. I didn't do this. I was out of town. But Morgan is telling them I came home early and killed him." Stunned silence followed. "Morgan? Why would she say that?" "That's what I need you to find out. I need bail. And I need someone I trust on the outside, working while I'm stuck in here. I'll be there in 30. Don't talk to anyone else." Brandon hung up. They escorted him back to his cell, and he resumed his stillness, body quiet, eyes open, breath calm. But his mind never stopped moving. If Wesley was truly gone, then whoever was responsible, whoever had taken his son, was going to lose much more than their freedom. If this was some elaborate deception, and a part of him still clung to that fragile possibility, He would dismantle it meticulously, piece by piece, until he uncovered the truth about his son. In another part of the city, a surveillance room dimly lit by flickering monitors housed Detective Moreau, hunched over the console, watching the same grainy video for what felt like the 12th pass. The figure entering the Mercer garage matched Brandon's height, but carried more weight through the chest and shoulders. The face, maddeningly, stayed hidden throughout the clip. She pulled up Brandon's flight itinerary once more. Every timestamp corroborated his account. He couldn't physically have been in two locations at once, unless somehow the footage from the Chicago airport had been faked. But what would drive him to such extremes? Her phone vibrated. A new message from the medical examiner. Positive ID on Mercer child delayed. Remains too compromised. Dental verification necessary. Moreau's brow knitted. The child's body had been deliberately incinerated beyond recognition. At first, she had assumed the motive was to erase forensic evidence. But what if there was another reason? What if the body wasn't Wesley Mercer at all? Graham Everett looked exactly as Brandon had remembered him, wearing a wrinkled but clearly expensive suit, his signature stubble as sharp as ever, and those penetrating eyes that had earned him a formidable reputation in Seattle's legal circles. They had been inseparable since the age of 10, the only two kids on the block more interested in chessboards than football fields. "You look like hell," Graham said as Brandon entered the consultation room. "Appreciate the honesty." Brandon lowered himself into the chair opposite, acutely conscious of how worn down he must appear after a night in a holding cell. Graham's tone shifted to something more sober. "I spoke with the DA. They're pushing for no bail, claiming you're a flight risk and a danger to the community. Pretty standard play. Their case isn't airtight, but they've got your wife's testimony, threatening texts sent from your phone, blood-stained clothing found in your garage, and a deceased child," he added, voice grim as he leaned forward. "That's about as damning as circumstantial evidence gets." "I didn't do this, and my alibi is solid," Brandon said, his voice cold and steady. "For now. Their angle is that you hired someone else and used the trip to cover your tracks." Brandon shook his head, frustrated. "What's going on with Morgan? I've spent enough time with her to know. I never thought she had this in her." "She always came across as genuine," Graham admitted. "She showed you what she wanted you to see, same as anyone. Same as I did," Brandon said, bitterness creeping in. Their eyes locked across the table. "I need to be out today." Graham gave a small nod. "Whitaker's the judge. I've stood before her. Tough but fair. If we can poke holes in their theory, we've got a shot." He paused. "But you're holding something back. What aren't you telling me?" Brandon hesitated, then answered carefully. "Lately, Morgan has been acting strange, distant. I think she's involved with someone else. And those new life insurance policies? Timing's suspicious." "You're saying she killed Wesley for the money?" Graham asked, raising his eyebrows. "That's dark, even for you." "I'm saying someone's dead, and someone wants me blamed. I'm not even sure the body is Wesley's." "That's a massive claim, Brandon. It's the only way the details make any sense." He leaned closer. "I need more than bail. Reach out to my sister Cassidy. Fill her in, but keep it discreet." "You want me to moonlight as a private investigator?" Graham asked, half smirking. "Bill me extra," Brandon said without a hint of humor. "Also, try retrieving our home security footage. It might still be backed up online before the system went down." Graham scribbled a note, visibly disturbed. "If Wesley really is gone, then whoever's behind this will answer for it." The tone in Brandon's voice carried a gravity that even Graham, his closest friend for nearly 3 decades, found unsettling. The bail hearing went about as well as anyone could have hoped. Judge Whitaker, after reviewing the arguments, set bail at $1 million, steep but well within Brandon's financial reach. By late afternoon, he was being processed for release. The conditions were strict: passport surrendered, ankle monitor installed, barred from any contact with Morgan, and confined to King County. As he was handed back his personal effects, a nurse with familiar features burst into the room, face drawn tight with both fear and anger. "Brandon!" Cassidy Mercer pushed past a protesting officer and threw her arms around her brother. He returned the embrace stiffly, never one to indulge in sentiment, even with family. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured. "Don't give me that," she snapped, pulling back. Her eyes were red-rimmed but blazing with purpose. "Your lawyer told me everything. Is it true? Is Wesley really—" Brandon glanced at the nearby officers. "Let's talk outside." Inside Graham's car, the composure Cassidy had held finally cracked. "They're saying you killed him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's all over the news. Morgan gave a tearful interview. She said she's scared of you too." "She said what?" Brandon's voice dropped, low and sharp with restrained fury. Without speaking, Graham retrieved his phone and tapped a video. It was a clip from the local news. On screen, Morgan stood outside their house, her face streaked with tears, voice quivering as she addressed a swarm of microphones. "All I want is justice for my little boy. I trusted my husband completely. I never believed he could do something like this. I keep wondering how I didn't see it. His anger, the way he always had to be in control." Her voice fractured, and she broke down sobbing as journalists surged closer, shoving their cameras and recorders toward her. Cassidy scoffed, the sound dry and scornful. "I knew she was phony," she muttered. "But this? This is calculated. Either she truly believes Brandon did it, or she's crafting this with precision." "She's in control," Brandon said grimly, "and we won't play into her hands." They maneuvered through thick, slow-moving afternoon traffic. "You can't go back to the house," Graham reminded him. "The judge put a restriction on you. You're barred from the property. And remember," he added, "it's still an active crime scene." "Crash at my place," Graham offered. "No," Cassidy interjected firmly. "He's staying with me. My building has top-tier security, and no one will think to look for him there." Brandon gave a sharp nod. "We start investigating. Quietly," he said. "Whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing. One mistake, and they disappear, along with whatever they're trying to get." "What do you think they want?" Graham asked. "Money," Brandon replied immediately. "Wesley's life insurance policy was huge. I also updated my own recently. Morgan is now the sole beneficiary." Cassidy's jaw tensed. "You think she killed Wesley? For the insurance?" "Her own kid?" Graham said, stunned. Brandon turned to look out the window, his voice quiet. "I'm not even sure Wesley's dead. The body was completely charred. Identifications pending dental confirmation. I need to see the autopsy report," he added. "Christ, Brandon," Graham said, shaking his head. "Even for you, that's cold." "It's not cold. It's logical. If someone wanted to pin a murder on me but didn't actually want to kill the victim, what's the play?" Cassidy's eyes widened in dawning comprehension. "You'd use a stand-in." "Exactly. The only question is, who did they use?" Brandon's phone vibrated. A text flashed on the screen from an unknown number. He opened it and passed the phone to Cassidy and Graham. "Not every officer believes you're guilty. We should talk. Just us. Waterfront Park, 7 p.m. "Moffat," Brandon murmured, recognizing the sender. "Detective Moreau. She's having second thoughts about the case." "Could be a trap," Graham warned. "Or it might be our first real lead," Cassidy countered. Brandon's eyes narrowed with resolve. "Either way, I'm going." While Brandon prepared to meet Moreau across town, Morgan Mercer sat poised in the living room, every detail carefully arranged for the role of grieving mother. The press had finally cleared out. The fridge was packed with condolence casseroles. She dabbed at her eyes, checked her compact to ensure the mascara looked artfully smudged. Then the doorbell rang. She paused, composed herself, and went to answer it. Cassidy Mercer stood outside, unreadable. "Thought you might want some company," she said calmly. Morgan hesitated, then stepped back to let her in. "Thanks for coming." Inside, Cassidy took a slow glance around. On the mantel, a collection of framed photos of Wesley formed a small shrine. Brandon didn't appear in a single one. She noted it silently. "Police said Brandon posted bail," Morgan said, voice wavering. "I'm terrified, Cassidy. What if he shows up here?" "He won't," Cassidy replied. "He's legally prohibited from coming near you." She sat on the edge of the couch. "And he wouldn't hurt you. Or Wesley." Morgan's expression shifted. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Something calculating flickered before she resumed the look of devastation. "You have no idea what he's capable of," she said softly. "I've seen another side of him." "We grew up together," Cassidy said evenly. "I know what my brother is, and what he isn't." A tense silence thickened the room. It was Morgan who looked away first. "All I want is to bury my child," she said, voice barely audible. "Let him rest." "Has the body been released?" Cassidy asked. "Not yet," Morgan mumbled. "They're still doing tests or something." She twisted the tissue in her hands. "Tell me the truth. Why are you really here? To defend Brandon?" "I'm here to find out what actually happened to Wesley." Cassidy leaned in slightly. "If someone hurt him, we both want answers. But the case against Brandon doesn't make sense." "I know what I saw," Morgan snapped, steel in her voice. "And what exactly did you see?" Cassidy asked steadily. "Because Brandon was in Chicago the day you say he was here. That's already verified." "He faked that," Morgan said firmly. "He's clever. You know that better than anyone." Cassidy studied her closely, eyes sharp and steady. "Are you getting help? A friend? Someone close by?" Morgan's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "Nothing, really. Just concerned you're on your own." Cassidy rose quickly to her feet. "I should leave." "But Morgan—" "Truth has a way of surfacing," she said. "It always finds a way." As she turned to go, Cassidy noticed Morgan's fingers subtly swiping across her phone, the motion fluid, efficient, and all too familiar. Night had draped itself over the waterfront park, casting the space into quiet stillness. Most of the people, tourists and locals alike, had already filtered out, likely off to grab dinner or return home. Brandon sat by himself on a bench facing Elliott Bay, watching the ferries drift silently across the darkening waves. The ankle monitor secured around his leg was a constant reminder of just how precarious his situation had become. Without warning, Detective Moreau appeared and settled beside him. She wore casual attire, jeans and a dark jacket, and kept her gaze fixed on the distant water. "This meeting puts me in a tight spot," she said bluntly. "I get that," Brandon replied. "I appreciate you being here. I'm only here because the facts aren't adding up." She finally looked at him. "The hotel surveillance from Chicago checks out. Multiple camera angles, no signs of tampering. There's no chance you were in Seattle when your wife claims you were." "She's not telling the truth," Brandon said, his voice even. "The real question is why," Moreau responded, handing him a manila envelope. "Look it over quickly. I need it back before you leave." Brandon opened the folder. Inside were crime scene photographs, forensic reports, and, most unsettling, images of a severely burned male body found in his garage. He fought back any reaction, scanning the material with detached focus. "The body's male," Moreau said quietly. "Roughly the same height and build as your son. But it's too damaged for a positive ID. We're waiting on dental confirmation." She hesitated. "But your wife hasn't been very cooperative. Said she had to search for the records. Didn't seem eager." Her expression grew darker. "There's more. The threatening messages sent from your number? They were traced back to a burner, not your actual phone. Someone faked it. Brandon nodded slightly, letting it sink in. What else? We pulled partial prints off the gas can used in the fire. They don't match yours, and they're not in any database. She paused again, just for a moment. I shouldn't even be looking at alternate theories. My superior's convinced you're guilty. But I don't go by gut feelings. I go where the evidence leads. She took the folder back. Your wife reported your son missing 2 days before she says you came home early. That timeline doesn't add up. Brandon's jaw tightened. So she told police he vanished, then later claimed I killed him when I returned? Exactly. And there's something else. We pulled footage from an ATM a few blocks from your house, time-stamped the day before Wesley allegedly went missing. Your wife's seen meeting a man there. It looked intimate. Do we have an ID? Not yet. The camera didn't catch a clean shot of his face. Brandon's mind was already moving. I need to know who he is. Mr. Mercer, she said, her voice sharper now. I'm sharing this because I want to see justice done for your son. But if you get in the way of the investigation— I won't, Brandon interrupted. Their eyes locked. You'll stick to the rules. I won't. My son might still be alive. Moreau didn't respond, and that silence told Brandon everything. She had her doubts, too. There's one more piece, she said. Your neighbor's kid, Landon Price, told the responding officers Wesley was afraid of your wife's new boyfriend, said the guy gave him the creeps. Brandon mentally filed that detail. Thanks, detective. I didn't tell you anything, she said, rising to leave. And if you break the law, I'll be the one to haul you in. Understood, Brandon said, loud and clear. As she disappeared into the distance, Brandon's phone buzzed. A message from Graham. Found something. Come to Cassidy's. Now. At Cassidy's apartment, Graham had arranged a collection of documents across her dining table. Financial records, phone data, still images from surveillance footage. Your wife's been busy, he said without preamble. She's been making regular cash withdrawals, 2-3 grand at a time. Just under the radar, but it adds up. Close to 50,000 in the last 3 months. Cassidy gestured to a blurry photo. And we think that's her yoga teacher. The picture showed Morgan stepping into a shabby motel off Aurora Avenue, a tall man's arm looped casually around her waist. Even though much of his face was in shadow, the man looked confident, attractive, too polished to blend in. His name's Rafael Vega, Graham explained. Owns a few boutique gyms around Seattle. Used to be a competitive bodybuilder. He's been charged with assault twice. One conviction downgraded to a misdemeanor. How'd you track him down? Brandon asked. I know people. And your sister's surprisingly skilled at digging up dirt. Graham tilted his head toward Cassidy, who responded with a humble shrug. Working in an ER, you see the worst of humanity. I got good at background checks, especially before dating someone. She opened a new image on her laptop, a screenshot from Instagram featuring Raphael at his gym, his arms slung around Morgan, both smiling brightly. The caption beneath it read, Private session with my favorite client, tagged with Tashik fitness goals. This went up 2 months ago, Cassidy noted, her voice tinged with disapproval. And the comments are full of flirtatious emojis from both sides. Brandon leaned closer, inspecting the photo with narrowed eyes. How long has this been going on? From what I've pieced together from their socials, at least 4 months, Cassidy responded. Graham handed over a fresh file, his expression turning serious. Here's where it starts getting complicated. Raphael's drowning in debt, he explained. On the surface, his gyms appear successful, but his finances are a mess. About 3 months ago, he secured a high-interest loan from some truly dangerous individuals, not your average lenders. These people make threats if you miss a payment. Suddenly, everything clicked for Brandon. So they needed money. Raphael and Morgan increased Wesley's life insurance, staged his death, and framed me for it. But then, where's Wesley? Cassidy asked, her voice tight, anxiety creeping in. If he's still alive, they're keeping him hidden, Brandon said, his tone turning steely. They have to keep him out of sight until the insurance pays out and the investigation dies down. Or, Graham said grimly, they never intended to keep him alive once the body was identified. A weighty silence fell between them. Brandon finally broke it, his voice low and resolute. We need to find him. Now. I can reach out to someone, Cassidy offered quickly. Landon Price. He and Wesley were really close. He might know something he didn't share with the police, Brandon agreed. Talk to him. He turned toward Graham. I want everything you can find on Rafael Vega. Property records, known associates, any location he could use to hide someone. Graham raised an eyebrow. What are you planning? Brandon glanced at his watch. To have a word with Rafael. Apex Fitness Center, nestled in downtown Seattle, was sleek and high-end, clearly designed for clients willing to pay a premium for privacy. Though it was late, the lights inside still shone as Brandon approached. Through the glass storefront, he saw a man matching Rafael's description locking the door for the night. Brandon waited in the shadows of a nearby recessed entryway, staying out of sight. Once Rafael stepped outside, Brandon followed him at a safe distance. Rafael walked 2 blocks before heading into a nearby parking garage. A few minutes later, he drove out in a black Audi, glossy and expensive. Brandon was ready. The Uber he had ordered arrived right on cue. The driver, unaware of the real reason for the ride, followed Brandon's quiet instructions to trail the Audi without drawing attention. Eventually, Rafael pulled up to a modest apartment building in Belltown. Brandon took note as he entered. A light flicked on in one of the upper units shortly after. Brandon paid the driver, then crossed the street to a small cafe with a clear view of the apartment entrance. He settled in and waited. Roughly 20 minutes later, his patience was rewarded. A woman hurried toward the building, Morgan looking nothing like the heartbroken mother she'd portrayed on television. She wore tight jeans, a low-cut top, and high heels. Her makeup and hair were flawless. She keyed in a code and slipped through the door. Brandon's phone buzzed. Cassidy. I talked to Landon, she said without delay. Wesley told him a couple weeks ago that his mom's friend scared him when she wasn't around. Said the guy acted friendly, but it felt fake. Did Wesley mention any specific places? Anywhere Rafael might have taken him? Brandon asked. Yeah. Landon said Wesley talked about a cabin near a lake. Apparently Morgan and the muscle guy used to bring him there. Said it was a secret spot. His dad didn't even know about it. Brandon's mind kicked into gear. A lake cabin. Did he give a location? No, just said it felt really far, like they drove forever to get there. You did great. Stay on him, Brandon said, ending the call. His attention shifted back to the apartment. Graham had already texted over Rafael's address and the building's entry code, acquired through undisclosed means. Brandon considered storming in, but paused. He needed more than half a story. Then, as if on cue, raised voices broke the night air. A window flew open, and the sound of arguing spilled across the street. At first, it was muffled, just anger in the tone. He crept closer. Now he could make out the words. I never agreed to killing anyone, Rafael said, voice sharp and panicked. Morgan responded, but her voice was too soft to hear clearly. They've got eyes on me now, Rafael continued, more frantic. Cops pulled footage from a bank. If they match it to me... Shut up, you idiot, Morgan hissed. Brandon pulled out his phone and started recording, inching closer without drawing attention. This was supposed to be easy, Rafael muttered, his voice lower now. Frame your husband, cash out the policy, split the money and vanish. Not whatever this has turned into. It is still easy, Morgan replied. There was a sharp edge to Morgan's voice that Brandon had never heard before, detached, precise, stripped of any feeling. We stick to the plan. Brandon takes the blame for the killing. We collect the insurance. And now we've got leverage on him. Raphael had interjected, uncertain. But what if they realize the body isn't? They won't, Morgan had snapped, cutting him off. We covered every detail. The window slammed shut, abruptly ending their exchange. But for Brandon, the damage was done. He'd heard enough. His worst suspicions had just been confirmed. Wesley was still alive. The corpse wasn't his son's. And even more chilling, Morgan and Raphael were plotting behind his back. Now he needed something irrefutable, concrete evidence, and above all, he had to find Wesley before the conspirators sensed they were exposed. Cassidy's apartment became their base of operations. Over the course of 3 pressure-filled days, they gathered intel, tracked movements, and built their case piece by piece. Brandon pushed himself relentlessly, allowing only minimal rest, his mind locked onto the goal. Graham managed to dig up a property deed tied to Raphael's brother, a cabin tucked away in the woods near Lake Wenatchee, about 2 hours northeast of Seattle. Satellite imagery confirmed its seclusion, one access road, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. It was a perfect spot to keep someone hidden. Detective Moreau also came through quietly. He verified that the dental records Morgan had submitted didn't match the body recovered. The police were keeping that information out of the public eye for now, working to identify the real victim. But the implication was undeniable. Wesley Mercer hadn't died. He was officially missing. By the 4th morning, Brandon had pulled together everything they'd uncovered and presented it to Cassidy and Graham. "We can take this to the police," Cassidy said urgently. "Let them raid the cabin and recover Wesley." "And what if he's already gone?" Brandon asked. "Or worse, we can't afford that gamble." "So, what's the move?" Graham asked, though the apprehension on his face showed he already suspected the answer, and didn't like it. "I draw them out," Brandon said simply. "Force them to make a mistake." He brought up a bank document on his laptop, proof of a $25,000 wire transfer to an offshore account. "The insurance payout landed yesterday. Morgan has full control of the funds now." Cassidy exhaled sharply. "Unbelievable. They actually did it. For the money." "For the cash and the freedom," Brandon said. "Morgan wanted to be rid of me. A divorce would have given her next to nothing. But if I go down for murder, she gets it all." "Heartless," Graham murmured. Brandon clicked over to another file, a phony news report his contacts had helped fabricate. "Tomorrow morning, this goes online. Mercer case breakthrough. DNA confirms body not the victim's son. Police pursue new suspects." Cassidy caught on immediately. "You're trying to rattle them." "Exactly," Brandon said. "They'll panic, try to run, maybe even try to finish what they started and silence Wesley. And we'll be watching," Cassidy added. "Tracking every step," Brandon confirmed. "This is seriously risky," Graham said. "If even one thing goes sideways—" "It won't," Brandon said flatly. His tone left no room for doubt. "I've planned for every outcome." "You can't account for panic, Brandon," Cassidy said quietly. "People don't behave rationally when they're scared." "But I can be ready for it," he said. He launched a tracking app, revealing a blinking red dot. "I installed a tracker on Raphael's car 3 days ago. Same with Morgan. The second either of them heads toward that cabin, we'll know." Graham dragged a hand down his face. "And what then? You can't confront them. You're still under house arrest. 1 foot past county lines and you'll have a dozen cops on you." Brandon gave a thin smile. "Already taken care of." He lifted the cuff of his jeans to reveal the ankle monitor, which was now connected to a decoy device simulating his presence within his apartment building. "As far as the system's concerned, I'm napping on my couch." "That's incredibly illegal," Graham muttered, though without much conviction. "So is being framed for murder," Brandon said coolly, glancing at the time. "That article goes live in 2 hours. I need you both ready the second they take the bait." The ruse worked faster than Brandon had dared hope. Within an hour of the story's release, both trackers showed sudden movement. Raphael and Morgan had rushed separately to Raphael's apartment, remained inside for a tense half-hour, then split up. Morgan heading north, Raphael turning east. "They're dividing," Cassidy observed, eyes fixed on the tracker. "She's headed for the cabin." "And Raphael's going east?" Brandon asked, watching the screen carefully. "Snoqualmie, looks like," Graham said after checking the map. "Why would he go east?" Brandon said aloud, "when the cabin's in the opposite direction?" "A detour. Either he's meeting someone or someone's meeting him." Brandon's eyes narrowed. "Or maybe he's abandoning the vehicle." Just as predicted, Raphael's GPS signal came to a stop at a park-and-ride near Snoqualmie. 10 minutes later, it still hadn't moved. "He switched rides," Brandon said, confirming what they'd guessed. "Now we stick with Morgan." They piled into Graham's SUV and began tailing the signal from her tracker, keeping enough distance to stay unnoticed as it steadily moved north, toward Lake Wenatchee. Brandon rode up front, his gaze locked on the GPS map, his face unreadable. "What's the move, Brandon?" someone finally asked after they'd been driving for an hour. "You gonna confront them? Save Wesley? Hand them over? Or all three?" Brandon didn't answer. In the back seat, Cassidy leaned forward. "What if Wesley's not at the cabin?" "He will be," Brandon replied, tone flat. "And if he's not, we'll find out where he was taken." He left no room for argument. The signal led them into the forest bordering Lake Wenatchee State Park, down a rough, winding dirt road. They stopped the SUV half a mile from the tracker's final position, a small A-frame cabin nestled under towering evergreens, a thin trail of smoke rising from its chimney. "Stay put," Brandon instructed. "If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call Moreau. The GPS coordinates are already loaded on my phone." He handed the device to Cassidy. "This is insane," Get said. "We should call the cops now." "Not yet," Brandon said firmly. "Not until I know it's clear." He double-checked the compact audio recorder hidden in his coat, and the handgun tucked at his waist, legally his, though carrying it broke the terms of his bail. 30 minutes, he repeated. Before anyone could object, he disappeared into the woods. He moved swiftly, silently through the undergrowth until the cabin came into view. Morgan's vehicle was parked outside. Through one of the windows, he saw her pacing back and forth, phone pressed to her ear, her movements tense and agitated. Brandon circled the perimeter cautiously, checking every window he passed. The cabin was simple: one open living area, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a loft accessed by a ladder. There was no sign of Wesley. But then his eyes caught on a heavy padlock securing what looked like a cellar door, half hidden beneath a pile of firewood along the cabin's exterior. "There you are." He remained still, keeping eyes on Morgan. She eventually hung up, checked her watch several times, then grabbed her keys and walked out. Once her car disappeared down the road, Brandon moved quickly to the cellar entrance. The lock was basic, cheap, and easy. He had it undone in under a minute. He opened the hatch cautiously, careful not to let it creak. A short staircase made of concrete led down into darkness. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and started down. The cellar was small, damp, and crudely built. Stone walls, packed dirt floor. In one corner, a motionless figure lay on a cot. "Wesley," Brandon whispered. The boy stirred, then bolted upright. "Dad?" Relief hit Brandon like a blow to the chest. He rushed to the cot and knelt beside it. Wesley's face was streaked with dirt, his clothes rumpled, but he looked unhurt. "Are you okay?" Brandon asked, scanning him quickly. "I think so, just scared." Tears pooled in the boy's eyes. "Mom said you were in jail. She said you couldn't come." "I'm here now." Brandon helped him up. "We have to move, fast and quiet." "She's coming back with Raphael," Wesley warned. "I heard them. They're planning to move me somewhere else." "Not gonna happen," Brandon said. "We'll be gone before they get here." They were halfway up the stairs when the crunch of tires on gravel froze Brandon in place. He gently guided Wesley back down. "Stay here." "Don't make a sound," he whispered. "Let me handle this." He carefully lowered the hatch, leaving it unlocked, then slipped around the edge of the cabin. Peering around the corner, he saw it wasn't Morgan's car. A black SUV had arrived, unfamiliar. Raphael stepped out from the driver's side, visibly nervous. A second man followed, older, broad-shouldered, his face roughened by time and weather. "I don't do last-minute changes," the man was saying. "The kid should have been gone before they found the body." "Things changed," Raphael said. "Morgan is bringing the cash. We do the trade, then you take the kid." "You really trust her, after the mess she made?" Raphael laughed harshly. "Trust? No, but she's out of options. Cops are closing in." Brandon made his move. He stepped from the shadows, weapon raised, aimed and steady. "Evening, Raphael." Raphael went pale, frozen in place. "Mercer," he stammered. Where's Wesley?" Brandon's voice was cold as ice. "Where is he?" Raphael stuttered. I don't, we didn't." The man stood motionless now, his expression calm and unreadable, eyes cold and calculating as he assessed Brandon. "Put the gun down, Mr. Mercer. This doesn't have to end in violence." "I wouldn't bet on that," Brandon replied, his grip firm, weapon held steady and aimed. "He's not here. My son's not here," Raphael shouted, voice cracking. "Morgan moved him earlier, took him someplace else." "You're lying," Brandon said, advancing a step. "This is your final chance." "He's downstairs," the composed man cut in, ignoring Raphael's panicked look. "Alive and unharmed." Brandon's eyes didn't flicker. "Wesley," he called out, firm and clear. "Come up here, slowly." A beat passed before the creak of a door echoed. Wesley emerged into the light, blinking against its brightness. The moment he saw his father standing armed, facing down two men, the boy froze mid-step. "Come here," Brandon said, his voice gentler now. "Get behind me." Wesley inched forward carefully until his father's body shielded him. "Well, Mr. Mercer," the stranger said smoothly, his tone relaxed. "Looks like we've hit an impasse." "You've got your son," he continued, "but we still have ourselves a problem." "Your problems don't matter to me," Brandon snapped. "Maybe they should," the man said with a trace of a smirk. "Your wife's quite the performer on TV. She's playing the heartbroken mother, claiming her husband murdered their child. The public eats that up," he went on. "And even though your son's alive, you're still staring down charges. Kidnapping, bail jumping, armed threats." "He's not lying, Dad," Wesley said quietly. "Mom told everyone you killed me." Still, Brandon didn't lower the gun. "I've got proof," he said. "Recordings of the two of them planning this. The body they passed off as Wesley. The money. It's all with my lawyer, who's talking to the Seattle police as we speak." Raphael swore under his breath. The older man's expression didn't waver. "Then I guess there's nothing left to discuss," he said, turning as if to leave. But he halted. "One last thing, Mr. Mercer," he added without looking back. "Your boy's seen our faces. That complicates things." "You try anything," Brandon warned, his voice sharp as a knife, "and you'll never leave this property." The tense silence was broken by the sound of a vehicle, an engine rumbling up the drive. Morgan had returned. Brandon acted instantly. "Wesley, run. Head for the trees. Graham's waiting just down the road in a blue SUV. Get to him." He thrust his phone into the boy's hand. "Show him this location." Wesley hesitated just a moment, then took off into the woods. Raphael started to follow, but Brandon's gun shifted fast. "Don't!" Morgan's car came to a stop behind the SUV. She climbed out carrying a duffel bag, only to freeze at the sight of Brandon. "No," she whispered, stunned. "No, this can't be happening." "It is," Brandon replied, finishing her sentence. "Hello, Morgan." Her face drained of color. "How did you find us?" "I'm thorough. You always knew that." Though his weapon stayed trained on the men, his words were for her. "It's done. Wesley's safe. Cops are on their way." "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Am I?" Brandon asked, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. "I've got everything. You and Raphael planning this whole thing. The fake murder, the insurance fraud, all of it." Morgan's composure started to crack. "You weren't supposed to make bail," she said, trembling. "You were supposed to rot in jail until we had it all wrapped up." "You never really understood me," Brandon said coolly. "You never saw me for who I was." "I saw enough," she snapped. "You're cold, calculating." Wesley turned to Raphael because at least he pretended to be a father. The older man cleared his throat. "Fascinating as this is, maybe we should stick to what's relevant, rather than airing your domestic grievances." "There is no other path," Brandon said flatly. "You're all going to prison. That's the end of it." "One possible outcome," the man agreed, inclining his head. "Here's another." He moved faster than Brandon anticipated, drawing a gun from inside his coat, but Brandon was quicker. His shot struck the man in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground with a cry. Raphael bolted for the SUV. After a moment of frozen indecision, Morgan ran to her own car. Brandon didn't pursue them. Wesley's safety was all that mattered now, not settling scores. He kept the pistol trained on the wounded man, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing. "The police are on their way," Brandon said. "You'll want to think carefully about what you tell them." "You shot me," the man said, dazed. "I did," Brandon replied. "And I've got a recording of everything you did, including your role in my son's kidnapping." His expression remained cold and unmoved. "Your move." The raid on the cabin had uncovered far more than Brandon had anticipated. Though Jonas Keaton, a career criminal and predatory lender, had been taken into custody, Morgan and Raphael had slipped away. Still, what they left behind was damning. Files identifying the burned body as a homeless man built like Wesley, records exposing the fraudulent insurance scheme, and a detailed escape strategy, including counterfeit documents for new identities. Detective Moreau had criticized Brandon's decision to operate off the books, but the results spoke for themselves. Wesley had survived. The setup had come undone. The case against Brandon had been thrown out. Within 48 hours, Morgan and Raphael were named primary fugitives in an active manhunt. Now, inside a precinct meeting room, Brandon sat with Graham, Cassidy, Detective Moreau, and most importantly, Wesley. The boy had gone through several medical checks and meetings with trauma counselors. He bore no physical injuries, but emotionally, he was fragile. Since being found, he hadn't once let go of Brandon. "The DNA analysis confirmed the body wasn't Wesley's," Moreau said gently, mindful of the child listening. "The deceased was Ethan Hartley. He'd been reported missing 3 weeks ago. A transient man with a documented history of mental illness." Cassidy's face went pale. "How did they get him?" "Keaton offered him shelter and food," Moreau replied. "According to Wesley, they were both held captive in the cabin at first." She hesitated, glancing briefly at the boy. But Wesley's voice cut through the pause, quiet and certain. "They made me watch. Raphael said I needed to understand what happens to bad people," he added. "But he wasn't bad. He was just lost." Brandon instinctively drew the boy closer. "That's over now. They're not going to hurt you, or anyone else." "From what we can tell, Morgan and Raphael intended to disappear abroad," Moreau continued. "They had passports, driver's licenses, and bank cards, all under aliases. We've contacted customs and coordinated with international agencies, but—" "They'll have fallback plans," Brandon cut in. Moreau nodded tersely. "Yes, people that smart and that desperate tend to be the most unpredictable." "What about the payout?" Graham asked. "All insurance disbursements have been frozen," Moreau answered. "Same with every account tied to Mrs. Mercer. Still, she managed to withdraw a large amount in cash before the freeze." Brandon mulled that over with his usual precision. Cash alone won't keep them hidden. They'll need support. Safe houses, contacts, fake credentials. We're digging into Raphael's network, Moreau said. His brother's being questioned about the property, but he swears he was kept in the dark. I believe him, Brandon replied. Raphael wouldn't involve his family. It's too risky, too messy. Wesley gently pulled on Brandon's sleeve. Dad, are they coming back for me? The question landed like a stone in water. No one moved. The room held its breath. Brandon met his son's gaze. No, I promise you, they won't get close to you again. Moreau cleared her throat. You'll both be under watch for now, she said. But unless something new comes to light, that protection has a limit. I understand, Brandon said, his tone darkening. But they're still out there. We'll catch up to them, Moreau assured, gathering her documents. But your priority right now is Wesley. Help him recover. That's what matters most. Once she'd gone, Graham pulled Brandon aside while Cassidy kept Wesley busy with a game on her phone. I know that expression, Graham said quietly. You're cooking something up. I'm making sure my son stays safe. You mean hunting them down yourself? That's not defense, Brandon. That's retaliation. No, Brandon replied calmly. It's prevention. So long as they're free, Wesley's not safe. Even Moreau knows the cops can't stay on us forever. Graham narrowed his eyes. So, what's your play? I know how Morgan operates, her patterns, her motives. She's smart, but she acts in her own self-interest. That makes her predictable. Brandon's voice was cool, deliberate. Raphael? He's the liability. He doesn't hold up under stress. You're going to use that. I'm going to finish this, Brandon said, glancing toward his son. His expression softened briefly. Once and for all. The strategy was sharp and strategic. Through reliable media contacts, Brandon leaked a fabricated tip. Raphael was reportedly in talks with prosecutors willing to betray Morgan for a deal. The rumor made its way onto a regional crime blog, one followed by both law enforcement and the city's underworld. Simultaneously, Brandon circulated false sightings suggesting Raphael had been spotted near the Canadian border, diverting the official search northward while Brandon quietly headed east, toward a location he considered far more plausible. A neglected vacation home in eastern Washington, once owned by Morgan's family. Never listed, never sold. This feels like a long shot, Graham muttered as they drove along a barren highway. Back in Seattle, Cassidy was looking after Wesley. What makes you think she'd hide out here? She mentioned it once, Brandon replied, eyes locked on the distant horizon. Said it was the only place that ever felt safe to her. When people are scared, they run to the places they remember feeling safe. It's instinct. If she wasn't there, they'd move on to the next stop on Brandon's list. As they crested a ridge, a small house came into view, a weather-worn ranch-style home tucked into the rugged hillside, isolated and battered by years of harsh elements. No cars were in sight, but a faint column of smoke twisted up from the chimney. Someone's inside, Graham murmured. Brandon eased the vehicle to a stop a few hundred yards out, tucking it behind a rocky bluff for cover. Stay here, keep the engine running, he instructed. Graham reached into the back seat and pulled out a dented aluminum bat. You're not walking in there alone, he said. Brandon didn't argue. They advanced on foot, swinging wide to take in the layout of the property. From a dirty, streaked window, they spotted Morgan sitting at the kitchen table, methodically stacking bricks of cash. She appeared to be alone. Brandon gestured for Graham to circle around to the back. He approached the front. There was no need for silence anymore. He wanted her to hear him arrive. He knocked. One heavy, intentional rap. Inside, everything went still. Morgan, he said, it's over. There was no answer. A moment later, the sound of a drawer being yanked open echoed through the house. Probably searching for a weapon, Brandon figured. Raphael flipped, he said evenly. Told the whole story. Cops are on their way. You're lying, she snapped, her voice shrill and shaky. Turn on the TV, check any crime blog. He turned state's witness to save his own skin. There was a pause, followed by the sound of movement. She was likely checking her phone. Brandon took the opportunity to test the doorknob. Locked. But the frame felt weak, the wood crumbling with age and moisture. I already moved most of the money offshore, she yelled. You'll never find a cent. I don't care about the damn money, Brandon growled. I care about our son, about the damage you nearly did to him just to make a payday. Silence followed. I wasn't going to hurt him, she said finally. He was going to come with us. Once it was safe. After convincing him I was a murderer? After making him watch you kill an innocent man? The quiet that followed told him he'd hit the mark. That wasn't my idea, she whispered. Raphael insisted. I never wanted Wesley to see that. But you let it happen, Brandon said coldly. You were part of every step. You helped design it all. You tried to destroy everything I cared about. Why? What the hell was it all for? Because you never loved me, she screamed, the words jagged with emotion. 12 years married to a man who treated love like a math problem. You negotiated our marriage like one of your boardroom deals. That still doesn't justify what you did. It justified leaving, she said, her voice shaking. It justified starting over. Raphael understood me. He saw me. He valued me. And yeah, he wanted your money too. Brandon stepped up to the door. He's finished, Morgan. He's testifying right now. A crash erupted from inside. Something hurled across the kitchen. No, he wouldn't betray me. Then call him. See if he picks up. She hesitated, then dialed. Brandon knew the call wouldn't go through. Raphael had been arrested at the Canadian border that morning. His phone was in police custody. But she didn't know that. As she focused on the ringing line, Brandon gave Graham the signal. With a powerful kick, Graham smashed the back door open. Morgan shrieked, dropped her phone, and reached beneath the table. Brandon burst in through the front just as she started to raise the gun. Don't, he said, his voice steady. She froze, the weapon halfway lifted. You're not here to arrest me? She asked. That's not my job, he replied, nodding to Graham, who now stood behind her. The police are almost here, but before they arrive, you and I are going to have a conversation. About what? She asked, her eyes darting around the room. About everything. The truth, Brandon said. He pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table, recording. For Wesley, he deserves to know what really happened. For a long moment she said nothing. Then something shifted in her face, like a weight pulling her down. She lowered the gun, set it on the table, and slumped forward. It was never meant to go this far, she murmured. At the start, it was just a fantasy, leaving it all behind, starting fresh. Raphael made it sound easy, real. The bogus insurance claim, Brandon said. That was his idea? He owed a lot, she said bitterly. To dangerous people. He said we needed a body, someone who could pass for Wesley. And I had to be the fall guy, Brandon said. So you murdered a homeless man, burned the body to make it look like our son. She flinched. I didn't kill him, she whispered. Raphael did. You just stood there. You let our son see it happen, she accused, her voice tightening with anger. That was never part of the agreement, and I made that clear. He was meant to be asleep, she continued, her voice rising. But Raphael dragged him downstairs, said it would make him stronger. Behind her, Graham made a noise of disgust. Brandon's expression stayed unchanged. And when it turned out the victim was Wesley, he said coldly, what then? Morgan looked away. The plan was to collect the insurance, wait out your conviction, then disappear with Wesley. He was supposed to grow up believing you killed someone, believing he was dead. Brandon's tone turned icy, fury buried under precision. That's beyond wrong, Morgan. That's inhuman. He would have coped, she shot back, defiant. Kids adapt. Her stare locked with his, unrelenting. He would have let go of you eventually. The words hung in the air, cutting and irreversible. Brandon let the silence linger before responding. You never really got me, he said. Not once, not in 12 years. But your greatest mistake? He leaned slightly closer. Was underestimating what I'd do to protect my son. A flicker of panic crossed her face, raw and sudden. What are you going to do? She asked in a whisper. Nothing, he replied, raising his phone and stopping the recording. The police will be here in about 8 minutes. I already sent them everything, including your confession. Almost on cue, distant sirens began to rise in the background. Morgan slumped into the chair behind her, the fight draining from her limbs. I did love you once, she said softly. Before I realized there was nothing real behind your smile, just charm and control in a pretty package. I know, Brandon said, unmoved. That's exactly why I never trusted you. She gave a short, bitter laugh. You never let me in. Not once, did you? No, he said, heading for the door as the sirens neared. And neither did you. With Morgan under arrest, and Raphael opting to cooperate instead of stay loyal, the evidence against them was overwhelming. A trial was scheduled 3 months out, with charges spanning murder, kidnapping, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Brandon should have felt some sense of closure. Wesley was finally safe, making slow but steady progress with therapy and the steadfast support of his father and aunt. Much of the stolen insurance money had been reclaimed. Life, for the first time in a while, was beginning to feel somewhat stable again. Still, something about the whole ordeal felt unresolved. Not guilt, exactly, more a persistent feeling that some truths were still buried. Even with both their confessions, even with the airtight case assembled, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling that Morgan and Raphael had kept certain truths hidden. You've got to let it go, Graham told him over drinks one evening, 6 weeks after the arrests. They were at Brandon's apartment, the city murmuring softly outside the windows. They're both going away for a long time. It's over. Justice has been served. This isn't about justice, Brandon said, watching the amber swirl in his glass. It's about making sure it's really over, that nothing's left hanging. What loose ends? Graham asked. They're locked up. The case is sealed tight. Jonas Keaton, Brandon said evenly. Keaton, a loan shark, had been charged as an accomplice, but managed to cut a deal. He'd be out in less than a year. You think he's still a threat? Graham asked, his brow furrowing. I think Keaton doesn't like loose ends, Brandon said. And Wesley is one. He saw things Keaton doesn't want remembered. Graham gave him a hard look. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Brandon hesitated, then tapped his phone. A voicemail began to play. Mr. Mercer, we've got unfinished business. Your boy saw things he shouldn't have. That creates problems, and problems need fixing. Let's talk solutions. Soon. The message crackled, but Keaton's voice was unmistakable. Christ, Graham muttered. Did you bring this to Moreau? Not yet, Brandon said. It's vague enough that his lawyers could dismiss it, frame it as concern over his own case. It's a threat, Brandon. I know. Brandon's jaw tightened. And I'm not going to sit around waiting for him to act on it. Brandon, Graham's voice was cautious. Don't do something you'll regret. I don't act on impulse. Brandon rose to his feet. I need Keaton's financial records, his properties, contacts, anything that gives me a trail. That kind of information isn't public, Graham said slowly, but someone with access might be able to find it. Brandon gave him a pointed look. Your firm manages accounts for 3 of the banks Keaton uses. Graham let out a breath, clearly weighing the request. You're asking me to commit a crime, probably more than one. I'm asking you to help protect my son. The silence stretched, dense with tension. Give me a day, Graham said finally. But Brandon, whatever it is you're planning, be careful. Keaton's not like Morgan or Raphael. He's the real thing, the kind of danger they only pretended to be. So am I, Brandon replied softly. They never saw it coming. The trap had been sprung with meticulous accuracy. Using the reluctant intelligence Graham had surrendered, Brandon mapped out every inch of Keaton's operation. His legitimate enterprises, a pawn shop and 2 check-cashing joints, his loan-sharking domain, his hired muscle, and most importantly, his pressure points. Chief among them was a silent IRS investigation that had been progressing for months. Keaton remained blissfully unaware, still believing his offshore assets were invisible to federal eyes. Brandon composed a bogus message, designed to mimic a leak from someone Keaton believed was planted within the IRS, a supposed insider he thought he'd bought. The warning was laced with just enough authentic details to feel real, ending with a claim that a critical witness was preparing to turn state's evidence. The name given, Rafael Vega. The message reached Keaton while Rafael was being transported from the county jail to court. As Brandon had predicted, Keaton took the bait instantly. 2 of Keaton's men moved fast to intercept the transport van, but they ran into a heavily armed police escort, alerted by an anonymous tip that a hit was imminent. The attempt failed. Additional charges were filed against Keaton, and whatever hope he had for bail evaporated. But that was only the beginning. In the next phase, Brandon began to selectively leak fragments of Keaton's financial records, some to prosecutors, others to rival gangs, setting off chaos that Keaton, stuck behind bars, couldn't begin to contain. Within weeks, his territory had been cannibalized by competitors, his front businesses were buried under forensic audits, and his enforcers were either behind bars or had vanished. Moreau arrived at Brandon's office without warning, the puzzle pieces finally coming together in her mind. "I know what you're doing," she said without preamble. "Do you really?" Brandon didn't look up from his monitor, still methodically tearing Keaton's empire apart, isolating every associate, ensuring that nothing would be left standing by the time Keaton got out. Moreau sat down across from him. "It's impressive, also illegal as hell." Brandon finally looked at her. "Can you prove any of it leads back to me?" "No," she admitted. "You cover your tracks too well, but I know what's driving it. The voicemail. This is about keeping Wesley safe." Brandon said nothing. He waited. "I should put an end to this," Moreau said. "That's my responsibility." "Is it also your responsibility?" Brandon asked, "to protect my son from a man who made a direct threat against his life? Because if it is, then the system has already failed." Her tone softened. "How's Wesley holding up?" "Better, but still not sleeping through the night. He still wakes up screaming, haunted by what he witnessed." Brandon's voice was level, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury, a rage he usually kept buried. "Keaton orchestrated that killing. He picked the victim, cleaned up the evidence, and now he's targeting my child." Moreau nodded gravely. "I understand," she said gently. "But there are lines you can't uncross. Cross them, and there's no way back." "I know that," Brandon replied, gaze steady. "But some lines are meant to be crossed, when everything that matters is on the other side." She stood. "Be careful. Keaton's still dangerous even from inside, and if anything happens to him that links back to you—" "It won't," Brandon said, turning his focus back to the screen. The conversation was over. 3 weeks later, the final move played out. Brandon had spent the time assembling a devastating dossier on Keaton that went far beyond the Morgan and Raphael incidents. Records of tax evasion, files suggesting witness manipulation in prior cases, and even loose but suggestive ties to a pair of unsolved homicides. He compiled the evidence into a comprehensive package and quietly distributed it to the FBI, the IRS's criminal division, and the state attorney general. No signature, no trace. But the result was explosive. With indictments stacking up and his high-priced lawyers abandoning him, Keaton was out of options. He took a plea, 20 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. The danger to Wesley was gone, but Brandon wasn't finished. One last thread remained. Morgan. Raphael had already flipped, trading information for leniency. Morgan, on the other hand, clung to a weak defense, claiming innocence, insisting she had been manipulated by both Keaton and Raphael. Her trial was approaching, and her attorney was shaping a sympathetic defense based on reduced culpability, emotional manipulation, psychological abuse. Brandon couldn't let that version of events take root, not after what she had done to his child. He arranged a single jailhouse visit, their first contact since her arrest. She looked diminished. Her prison-issued clothes hung loosely on her now thinner frame. Her hair was yanked back harshly, her face bare, but her eyes remained alert, calculating as she sat across from him. "Didn't expect you to come," she said. "Neither did I," Brandon answered coolly. "Your lawyer's painting you as a victim, caught between Raphael and Keaton." "Because I was," she replied, adopting a tone of vulnerability. "You know how Raphael could be, controlling, menacing." "Like I supposedly was?" Brandon asked, voice even. She hesitated. "That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, that I controlled you during our marriage, and that Raphael simply took over where I left off." "You've never taken responsibility for what you've done," she accused, her voice tight with bitterness. "You have no idea what it's like to live with constant fear, to feel completely trapped." "Oh, don't I?" Brandon leaned forward slightly, his tone measured and restrained. "I know exactly what it means to be terrified for someone you love, to do anything, no matter the cost, to keep them safe." Morgan's expression wavered, a shadow crossing her features. "I loved Wesley," she murmured. "I still do." "You forced him to witness a killing," Brandon said. "You let him believe his own father was the murderer, and that he tried to end his life. You kept him locked away in a basement." His voice was calm, but each word landed with precision. "That's not love, Morgan. That's control." Her composure snapped. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm going to prison. I've lost everything. I want the truth, an admission of guilt. No excuses, no plea of mental instability, just the truth, without spin." She barked out a dry, mirthless laugh. "And why would I ever agree to that?" "Because I have something you haven't seen," Brandon replied, sliding a piece of paper across the table toward her. She reached for it slowly, unfolding it with trembling hands. "Why didn't you turn this over to the police?" It was a transcript, capturing a conversation between her and Raphael at the cabin. In it, the two of them laid out every detail of their plan for Wesley, the insurance scam, their escape, and the lies they intended to tell. Morgan turned ghostly pale. "Where did this come from?" "I bugged the cabin before law enforcement showed up," Brandon said coolly, retrieving the paper. "Maybe your lawyer can argue you were coerced, but no jury is going to ignore the fact that a mother drugged her child, lied to him about his father's death, and tried to vanish with him." "You're bluffing," she whispered, though doubt had begun to surface in her eyes. "Am I?" Brandon stood and pushed his chair back. "Confess, Morgan. Own every bit of it. If not, I take this to the district attorney, the press, and to Wesley's therapist." "You'd expose him to that?" she asked, horrified. "You'd let him hear that?" "I wouldn't be the one doing it," Brandon replied, his face unreadable. "That would be your decision." He walked away without waiting for an answer. There was no need. Her choice was already made. 3 days later, without any explanation, Morgan changed her plea to guilty on all counts. Her lawyer was speechless. The prosecution was thrilled. The judge handed down a 30-year sentence. As for the recording, it never existed. But Morgan, who had spent her life weaving lies, couldn't recognize the truth when it was used against her. 6 months after her sentencing, Life was starting to settle into something resembling peace. Brandon had scaled back his travel to be home more, ensuring Wesley had the support he needed. Therapy and time were beginning to help the boy regain his balance. They'd moved to a new home, a place without ghosts. On a cool fall evening, Brandon stood on the back porch, watching Wesley play in the yard with his cousin, Cassidy's daughter. Wesley's laughter carried across the air, unburdened, joyful. It was a sound that had once been rare, now slowly becoming part of the everyday. It was the one thing that could still reach the guarded corners of Brandon's heart. "He's coming along," Cassidy said, joining him at the railing. "The nightmares don't hit as often anymore." "Once a week now," Brandon replied, eyes never leaving his son. "His therapist says he's making great progress." "Kids are resilient," Cassidy said. "That's what everyone keeps telling me," he muttered. She watched him, her gaze searching. "And you? Are you starting to heal?" He glanced sideways. "I'm managing." "You're surviving. That's different." She sighed quietly. "He's worried about you. Says you're colder than you used to be. Graham talks too much. He loves you. We both do," she said gently, her hand brushing his arm. "You took down Keaton's entire network. You made sure Morgan and Raphael are locked away where they belong. Wesley's safe now. It's done, Brandon. You can let go." He didn't respond immediately. Down below, Wesley had knelt in the grass, eyes wide with wonder, probably marveling at a caterpillar or some other small discovery. "It won't ever truly be over," Brandon said finally. "Not really. What they did to him, what they stole from him, his trust, his sense of safety." His voice was quiet, controlled, but his grip on the railing was iron tight, his knuckles blanched. "You can't undo the past," Cassidy said softly, "but you can help him move forward by letting yourself do the same." Brandon gave a faint shake of his head. "I don't need to heal. I need to stay vigilant." Inside the house, the doorbell rang. Graham had arrived for their weekly dinner, one of the new routines they'd created for Wesley. A life rebuilt around him, one grounded in safety, in presence, in love. Later that evening, after the children had been settled into bed, the three adults gathered in the living room, each cradling a glass of wine. The conversation moved easily between Cassidy and Graham, with Brandon mostly observing, offering a few words now and then. At length, Graham cleared his throat and, with a casual tone that didn't quite hide its intent, said, "I've got an update. Raphael's filed an appeal. Says he's come up with new evidence that could exonerate him from the worst of it." Brandon's expression didn't waver. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "His legal team's being evasive. Probably just standard appeal tactics," Graham replied, keeping a close eye on Brandon for any reaction. "The DA isn't worried," he added after a moment. "Should I be?" Brandon shook his head. "No. The case is solid. Morgan's confession pulled everything together." Cassidy leaned in slightly. "Have either of them tried to contact Wesley?" "Morgan sends letters," Brandon answered, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't let him read them." "That's probably wise," Graham said with a nod. "At least for now." "Not just for now," Brandon said flatly. "Forever. She forfeited that right." A weighty silence followed, pressing down on the room until Brandon rose to refill his wine glass. "There's more," Graham eventually said. "Detective Moreau came by yesterday. She's worried about you." He looked directly at Brandon. "She's beginning to piece things together about what happened to Keaton's crew?" "She doesn't have proof," Graham went on, "but she's asking questions." "I appreciate her concern," Brandon said in a measured tone. "But she's wrong." "Is she?" Graham asked, his voice probing. "Because from where I stand, you're not the same. You've always been calm, controlled. But now, there's something harder about you." "I had to be," Brandon said, "to keep Wesley safe." And now that the threat is gone, what's driving you? Graham pressed. Me. Brandon turned his wine in the glass, thoughtful. Insurance. Insurance against what? Cassidy asked. Against whatever comes next. Against betrayal. Against exposure, Brandon said, his voice cool and precise. I won't be caught off guard again. Graham and Cassidy exchanged a glance, unease creeping into their eyes. That's not really living, Cassidy said gently. It's the only way to make sure Wesley stays safe, Brandon answered. Safe, yes, Graham said. But what are you teaching him? That life is something to defend against, not something to live in? I'm teaching him how to survive, Brandon replied, his tone firm. The world showed me what it was. I adapted. Before either could respond, a small voice drifted in from the hallway. Dad? All three turned toward the sound. Wesley stood there, framed in the doorway, pajamas rumpled and hair tousled from sleep. Bad dream again? Brandon asked, his voice instantly softer. Wesley gave a small nod. Brandon crossed the room in an instant and crouched to meet him. Was it the same one? No, Wesley whispered. This time, you were gone. A shadow passed across Brandon's face, brief but unmistakable. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You hear me? Wesley searched his face, eyes mirroring his father's. I promise, Brandon said again. He pulled the boy close, holding him tightly in an embrace that said what words couldn't. Over Wesley's shoulder, he looked up to see Graham watching him, Cassidy's face drawn with quiet worry. They were afraid, and Brandon knew it, that in trying to shield his son from harm, he might become the very thing Wesley needed protecting from. Someone cold, withdrawn, and consumed by control. Maybe they had a point, but they hadn't been locked in that cellar. They hadn't seen the fear etched into Wesley's face. They hadn't felt the agony of realizing his wife, the courts, even his own judgment had failed to shield his child. He wouldn't let that happen again. Not ever. Not at any cost. Later, when Wesley had drifted back into sleep, safe, warm, and with Brandon beside him, he returned to the living room where Graham and Cassidy still sat, waiting. He needs me, Brandon said quietly. He needs all of you, Cassidy replied. Not just the part driven by fear and control. I'm not driven by anything, Brandon answered. I'm focused. Graham leaned forward. It's over, Brandon. You got justice. But if you can't let go of this edge, then in a way, they've still won. Brandon paused, absorbing the words. Maybe, but he's safe. That's what matters most. And is he happy? Cassidy asked softly. Is Wesley happy? He will be, Brandon said. Eventually. As Cassidy and Graham rose to leave, they made him promise he'd reach out if he or Wesley ever needed help. Brandon saw them to the front door of his new home. The life he'd painstakingly constructed had been torn apart, only to be rebuilt with even greater care. Stronger barriers, fewer flaws to exploit. That was the oversight, missing one vital truth. As they parted ways for the night, he leaned close and whispered to Graham, I don't lose. A shadow crossed Graham's expression. You might not, he murmured, but every triumph takes its price. Once they had left, Brandon made another full sweep of the perimeter, ensured every entry point was secure, then quietly returned to Wesley's bedroom. His son slept soundly, breath calm and steady, one small arm curled protectively around the plush tiger Cassidy had given him. Brandon stood motionless in the dark, watching over him, silent and vigilant, a solitary sentinel warding off the terrors that prowled the night, whether born of fear or flesh. Beyond these walls, danger still lingered. But inside this space, fortified by every defense Brandon had crafted, lived the only thing that truly mattered. The one being who had seen the worst of humanity and still managed to find joy, who still laughed, still played, still trusted. For that fragile trust, for that sliver of hope, Brandon would remain eternally on guard, tireless, unbreakable. The disguise had fallen away, and what remained beneath was not the monster Morgan had described. No, what was left was something even more formidable. A man possessed of absolute purpose, no longer bound by conventional morality. A man willing to sacrifice whatever it took, pieces of himself, if necessary, to protect the one he held dearest. And that would have to be enough. It must be. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.